Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Scholar Gladiator. So following on from my video of yesterday talking about the butts and other types of archery target used in medieval Europe, particularly England, obviously because of the sources that I have available to me. And I've delved deeper into the butts, basically, because some really interesting questions came up. As always, I read most of the comments actually that are posted under my videos, and very often they inspire future videos. So motivation, guys, get posting in the comments underneath. But in researching the butts a bit more, I've been on britishhistory.ac.uk. which is an amazing resource, and something where a lot of my research in years gone by has been based on. Actually, a lot of the lectures I've given at events talking about coroners' reports, injuries in fencing and violence, mostly through the 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th centuries in England. Anyway, I found a bunch of stuff in looking for regulations about the distance, the size of the butts essentially, and the distance between the butts. And I found a couple of stories which I thought I'd share with you. They're interesting enough that I thought I'd read them out to you. And they're from 1566. So this is Elizabethan. And this is from September in Queen Elizabeth's reign, 1566. They both involve the practice of archery at the time. Now, something that's worth mentioning for those who didn't know. So in 1566, you've got to think about, this is the period of Francis Drake, America's been discovered, the Spanish Armada, all of this kind of stuff in this period. And so this is the age of gunpowder, very much so, ships with huge numbers of cannons on them and people using arquebuses and even pistols. But the longbow was still a battlefield weapon. In fact, the longbow was still being used even in the 17th century in limited capacity. So I think it saw a very tiny amount of use in the English Civil War, which is in the 1640s. But in the middle of the 16th century, the middle of the 1500s, in England, and a few other places, but mostly in England, the longbow was still seen as a military weapon. It might be a military weapon that's not as important as it had been 100 years earlier, not by a long stretch, in fact, but nevertheless, it was still a military weapon, and there were still laws which Henry VIII had reinforced, so Elizabeth's father, about the practice of archery. So people still practiced archery, and that's what we're witnessing here. Now, these are coroners' reports, essentially, records of investigations into people that died, and both of these accounts relate to the practice of archery. So let's see what they say. So for you who want to read this as well as hearing me read it, you can see I'll post the text below as well as the link to the websites. So on the 19th of September 1566, in the reign of Queen Elizabeth, the coroner's Inquisition-post-mortem taken at the parish of Stebunheth in Middlesex, on view of the body of Matthew Parry, who was late of the said parish, a labourer, there lying dead. So the coroner investigates, why is this dead person dead? With the verdict that on the 4th day of the last of August, between 2 and 3 p.m. in the afternoon, the said Matthew Parry was lying asleep. Don't fall asleep by the butts. He was lying asleep and hidden from view in a little ditch near the Limehouse butts. So in the Lyttell Fielde of Stebunheth, don't know where that is, but we're near Limehouse, so what's now London, when William Becket of the said parish limeburner, then shooting in the company of other archers, shooting with longbows, so they're just practicing archery at the butts, at the Limehouse butts, shot in the direction of the goal, in other words the target, an arrow that after falling slipped along the ground into the ditch, and by mischance gave the said Matthew a wound on the forepart of his head. Now this is very interesting. This tells us all sorts of things. It tells us people were practicing archery. It tells us specifically that the arrow slipped along the ground. Now I've seen this happen myself, particularly in winter. This is September, so I guess the weather could have been cold. And I've seen arrows skim along the ground, and they can travel for quite some distance. So this arrow wasn't shot directly at poor Matthew Parry, but slid along the ground and then flew into the ditch where he was lying asleep. Why were you lying asleep in a ditch near the butts? Anyway, probably hiding from his boss or, I don't know, wife or something. Children, perhaps. Anyway, it slipped along the ground into the ditch and by mischance gave Matthew a wound on the forepart of his head. Ouch! Of which wound he languished until the 19th day of August, so from the 4th? Yeah, between the 4th and the 19th of August with a head wound, youch, when he died thereof. The length of the time between the death and the inquest is noteworthy, indeed. So there we go, so a minor wound to the head, and unfortunately he died from it. Don't go to sleep by the butts. So here's the other report. It actually comes straight below this, and that's why I noticed it. On the 26th of September, again 1566, in Queen Elizabeth's reign, the coroner's Inquisition-post-mortem taken at the parish of St Marie Matephelon, strange name, alias Whitechapel, County Middlesex. So again, Whitechapel now very much in London, in the east side of the city. On view of the body of William Barnes, late of the said parish, was a shoemaker, there lying dead. Why did he die? Did he choke on a shoe? What happened? So they're lying dead, with verdict that on the 9th day, I think nth day it says, of the last August, between 6 and 7 p.m, so kind of early evening, the said William Barnes at the Spitalfield, that's now known as, famous for its market, alias Fleming Nose, not sure what that means, in the parish of Stebunheth, again, came to the common marks. So marks is an interesting term, and that's something I didn't mention in my previous video, but targets essentially, called 12 score pricks in the said field to see and watch certain archers and archery practice. Then, being at the said marks, so that's interesting, that tells us yet another thing. So previously we found that there was a ditch, perhaps for safety reasons around the marks, but here we see that not only do people go to the marks to practice archery and do archery regularly, but they also apparently went to spectate as well, which is interesting, isn't it? So it was partly a spectator sport as well. Then being at the said marks, when Francis Ellman of Roydon, County Hertford, a brickmaker, shot an arrow that, being carried out of its course by the force of a strong wind, a gust of wind, struck the said William Barnes on the head. Youch. This is a direct shot. All the archers and other watchers of the shooting called out to him to beware of the danger, avoid the arrow, and that from the wound so given him on the said 11th of August last, the said William languished and died by mischance on the 15th day of the same month. So he didn't quite live as long as the other guy. But nevertheless, it's interesting to note he didn't die straight away, and that's a head wound from an arrow, no helmet or anything else involved, probably a hat. The length of time between death and inquest is remarkable. They say that again. So again, you wouldn't expect someone hit in the head with the arrow to live for so long, but it depends which part of the brain it injures, I guess, or, you know, maybe it didn't penetrate fully, maybe it glanced slightly, who knows. They don't say that. Anyway, very, very interesting. So again, 1566, the longbow was still being practiced with regularly in what's now London, although then was sort of outside London, in Middlesex, which kind of goes around London. And they were still practicing regularly, still shooting arrows. It was a sport that lots of people took part in. There were butts, there were marks, which probably means mounds of earth, and targets in front of them, probably a board of kind, perhaps in some cases a rod rather than a target. And some people came to spectate at that. So I think that's really, really interesting. And inevitably, sometimes there were accidents and people caught an arrow to the head. But always remember, folks, don't go to sleep by the butts. So there we go. On that bombshell, I'm going to leave you now. I hope this has been relatively interesting. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of interesting sources on British History Online, so check out the link to that. The text to both of those coroners' reports are below. Yeah, give us a like and a subscribe if you haven't done already, and I'll see you really soon on the channel for another video. Cheers, folks.
Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.